My name is Clara Sterling. I am 32 years old, and 3 days before my family was supposed to gather for a surprise housewarming party in our new four-bedroom home, I discovered that the interior designer my mother-in-law hired was actually my husband's secret mistress. Even worse, the $185,000 I had saved over 6 years of relentless work had been funneled through a fake real estate shell company to put the deed entirely in her name. For 6 years, I worked two jobs as a senior accountant and independent tax consultant. I skipped vacations, wore 6-year-old clothes, and eventually sold my late father's prized lakeside cabin for $55,000, putting every single cent into our joint housing account. My husband, Mark, earned a modest salary at a logistics firm, but he always spoke passionately about our shared future. He assured me that every sacrifice I made was a brick in the foundation of our dream home. His mother, Eleanor, pretended to be my biggest supporter. She would pat my hand, tell me how proud she was of my work ethic, and promise that once we bought our forever home, I could finally rest and start a family. 2 months ago, when we finally found the perfect home, a beautiful two-story property in a quiet suburban neighborhood, Eleanor introduced us to a woman named Chloe. Eleanor claimed Chloe was a brilliant, up-and-coming real estate broker and interior decorator who could handle the entire transaction and design the interior at a steep discount as a family favor. I trusted them. I spent weekends walking through home decor stores with Chloe, picking out kitchen tiles, hardwood flooring, and custom living room furniture. Chloe would smile, ask for my preferences, and praise my taste. In reality, she was taking my hard-earned money, decorating the house to her personal liking, and preparing to move in with my husband, while I was left holding a massive personal loan for the renovations. They thought I was just a quiet, exhausted wife who was too blinded by love to notice the numbers. But they forgot one fundamental rule of accounting. Every ledger must balance, and when the figures don't add up, I audit until I find the fraud. Before I tell you how I walked into that housewarming party and dismantled their entire scheme in front of 18 relatives, take a second to look at the clock. Tell me, what time is it where you are right now? Where are you listening from? And what is the weather like outside today? I always love reading your comments and seeing where around the world these stories find you. To understand how Mark and his mother managed to deceive me for so long, you have to understand the dynamic of our marriage. Mark was raised to believe that his mother's word was absolute law. Eleanor was a master of subtle manipulation. She never raised her voice. Instead, she used passive-aggressive guilt to control everyone around her. When Mark and I got married 7 years ago, we lived in a tiny, rented one-bedroom apartment. I was determined to build a solid financial foundation before having children. I set up a dedicated high-yield savings account, specifically for our future home down payment. Every month, without fail, I deposited 60% of my paycheck into that account. Mark contributed a few $100s whenever he could, but his mother always seemed to have an urgent financial emergency. One month, it was a leaking roof on her cottage. The next month, it was unpaid medical bills, or a lease payment on a new car for Mark's younger sister. Mark would quietly withdraw money from his separate checking account to cover his mother's demands, while I carried the weight of our household rent, groceries, and utilities. I didn't complain. I told myself that family helped each other. When my father passed away 3 years ago, he left me his modest lakeside cabin. It was the place where he had taught me how to fish, where we spent every summer of my childhood. Selling it was one of the most painful decisions of my life, but I wanted a permanent home for the family Mark and I were planning to build. I sold the cabin for $55,000 and transferred every dollar straight into our housing fund. By early this year, the account reached $185,000. It was enough for a substantial 40% down payment on a $450,000 property, leaving us with a very manageable monthly mortgage. That was when Eleanor introduced Chloe. Chloe was 26, stylish, soft-spoken, and extraordinarily attentive. Eleanor brought her to our apartment for dinner one Sunday evening, introducing her as the daughter of a longtime family friend who had recently launched a boutique real estate and design agency called Apex Living. Mark seemed unusually enthusiastic about hiring her. He argued that using an independent agent like Chloe would save us thousands in closing costs and realtor fees. I agreed, feeling grateful that Eleanor was taking an active interest in helping us settle down. For 6 weeks, Chloe became a constant presence in my life. She met me during my lunch breaks to review floor plans. She sent me color swatches for the master bedroom. She even sat on my couch with a tablet showing me custom Italian leather sofas and kitchen cabinetry. I approved every purchase, writing checks directly to Apex Living under the assumption that the money was being held in escrow for the property purchase and official renovations. The red flags didn't appear as bright red banners. They appeared as tiny, barely noticeable accounting discrepancies. As a senior accountant, I am trained to look at transaction metadata. 3 weeks ago, while preparing our annual tax documentation, I requested formal tax identification receipts from Apex Living for the escrow deposits. Chloe delayed sending them, claiming her company's accountant was on vacation. A week later, I received a short text from my bank notifying me that a personal line of credit for $30,000, which Mark and I had jointly opened as a backup emergency fund, had been fully drawn down. When I asked Mark about it, he shrugged and said Chloe needed an upfront advance to secure the contractors for the kitchen installation before the grand opening party. I felt a pit form in my stomach. A licensed real estate escrow account does not draw down personal credit lines without a signed purchase contract and title work. The following afternoon, instead of driving straight home from my office, I decided to drive out to the new house unannounced to inspect the kitchen renovations myself. It was a Tuesday at 3 p.m. I parked my car 2 blocks down the street and walked up the gravel driveway. The front door was unlocked. As I stepped into the foyer, I smelled expensive floral perfume, the exact same perfume Chloe wore during our lunch meetings. I walked quietly down the hallway toward the master bedroom. The door was half open. Inside, Chloe and my husband were sitting on the edge of a brand new king-sized bed, the exact bed I had picked out and paid for 2 weeks earlier. Mark had his arm around her waist and Chloe was laughing, holding up a glass of white wine. On the nightstand sat a framed photo of the two of them on a beach in Florida, a trip Mark had told me was a mandatory corporate team-building retreat 3 months ago. I heard Chloe's voice clearly through the open door. Your mother said the closing papers are finalized? Once the housewarming party is over on Friday, how are you going to tell Clara she's not on the deed? Mark kissed her cheek and chuckled. Don't worry about Clara. She trusts my mom completely. Mom got her to sign the power of attorney paperwork under the pretense of expediting the property taxes. By the time Clara realizes the title is registered under Apex Living, I'll file for divorce and claim the $185,000 was a gift from her to my mother's business venture. And the $30,000 credit line? Chloe asked, taking a sip of wine. That's in her name, Mark replied coldly. She earns enough to pay it back over time. She'll be fine. Standing in that hallway, listening to the man I had loved for 7 years casually plan my financial and emotional destruction, I felt a wave of icy composure wash over me. The pain was immediate, but my professional instinct immediately took control. I didn't push the door open. I didn't scream, throw wine glasses, or start a physical confrontation. I knew that if I lost my temper right then, they would lock the doors, hide the paperwork, and construct a narrative that I was hysterical and abusive. I turned around, walked out of the house as quietly as I had entered, got into my car, and drove directly to a corporate fraud lawyer's office downtown. For the next 72 hours, I didn't sleep more than 2 hours a night. Working alongside my attorney and a private forensic investigator, I pulled every bank statement, canceled check, wire transfer receipt, and email log from the last 7 years. What we discovered was even more sinister than I had imagined. Apex Living was not a real estate agency. It was an unregistered shell company created by Eleanor and Chloe 4 months ago. Eleanor had convinced Mark to start an affair with Chloe over a year ago, pitching the idea that they could use my high income and savings to acquire a luxury property for Mark and his mother's legacy, while discarding me once the heavy lifting was done. The $185,000 from my savings account, including the $55,000 from my father's cabin, had been wired directly into Apex Living's corporate account. Using a forged signature on a property transfer authorization form that Eleanor had slipped into a stack of routine tax documents, they registered the deed of the new home under Apex Living, with Chloe listed as the sole managing director and Eleanor as a 50% shareholder. Mark was listed as a paid consultant, shielding him from direct ownership liabilities while allowing him to live there rent-free. The $30,000 credit line I was left with had been spent on luxury appliances, expensive wine, and high-end furniture, all selected by Chloe. My attorney looked at the pile of evidence on his desk and shook his head. Clara, this is textbook grand larceny, wire fraud, and conspiracy. We can file an emergency injunction tomorrow morning and freeze the assets quietly. No, I said, looking up at him with absolute calm. Oh, if we do it quietly, Eleanor will hire a criminal defense lawyer, blame everything on Chloe, and paint Mark as an innocent victim who was misled by his wife and mother. I want them all in the same room, in front of everyone they care about. Mark, Eleanor, and Chloe had organized a massive housewarming party for Friday evening at 7 p.m. They had invited 18 members of our extended family, including my aunts, uncles, Mark's colleagues, and several prominent local business contacts. Eleanor wanted to showcase the new $450,000 home as a testament to her family's wealth and success. They thought I was going to show up after work, exhausted and smiling, acting as the welcoming hostess while they secretly held the keys to my life. I spent Friday afternoon at the county courthouse. By 4 p.m., a judge had signed an emergency freeze order on all bank accounts associated with Apex Living, an immediate injunction halting any occupation of the property, and a subpoena for Eleanor, Mark, and Chloe. At 7:15 p.m., the party at the new house was in full swing. Soft music played through the installed surround sound system. Warm light spilled from the floor-to-ceiling windows, and caterers served appetizers in the newly renovated marble kitchen. Eleanor was standing near the fireplace, wearing a tailored cream sweater, holding a champagne glass, and proudly showing off the custom Italian leather sofa to my aunts and uncles. Mark was near the kitchen island, laughing with his colleagues, while Chloe walked around with a clipboard, pretending to be the hired designer receiving compliments on her exquisite taste. I walked through the front door at 7:30 p.m. I was wearing a sharp dark blazer, tailored black trousers, and carrying a structured leather briefcase. Standing right behind me were two uniformed county police officers and my senior fraud investigator. The ambient chatter in the living room slowly died down as guests noticed the police officers standing in the entryway. Eleanor set her champagne glass down on the mantelpiece, a tight, forced smile appearing on her face. "Clara, darling, you're finally here," Eleanor said, stepping forward with open arms, trying to control the room. "Why are there officers at the door? Is everything all right with your car?" Mark walked over from the kitchen, looking visibly uncomfortable as his eyes shifted between the officers and my briefcase. "Clara, what is this?" "This is a private family celebration. Why did you bring police officers into our new home?" "It's not our home, Mark," I said, my voice cutting through the silent room with cold crystal clarity. "And it's certainly not yours." I walked to the center of the living room, right between the marble kitchen island and the living room fireplace where everyone could see me clearly. I opened my briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of certified legal documents, and looked directly at my mother-in-law. "Eleanor," I said, my voice dropping to a temperature colder than anything I had ever used with her before. 3 days ago, I conducted a complete forensic audit of the transactions associated with this house purchase. "Clara, have you lost your mind?" Eleanor snapped, her polite facade dropping instantly, revealing a sharp, cruel glare. "You've been overworked. I told Mark you were under too much stress with your accounting firm. Officers, my daughter-in-law is having an emotional breakdown." "Do not interrupt her, ma'am," the lead police officer said sternly, stepping forward and placing his hand near his belt. "Allow her to speak." I pulled out the first document, a high-resolution scan of the bank routing transfers, and held it up for my aunts, uncles, and Mark's colleagues to see. "Over the last 6 years, I deposited $185,000 into a joint housing account," I announced to the room. "That included $55,000 from the sale of my late father's cabin, the only thing I had left of his memory. 4 weeks ago, $185,000 was transferred directly into an account belonging to a company called Apex Living." I pointed directly at Chloe, who was standing near the kitchen wall, her face suddenly draining of all color. Chloe is listed as the founder and 50% shareholder of Apex Living, I continued, my voice echoing across the open plan floor. The remaining 50% belongs to Eleanor. They used my savings along with a $30,000 credit line opened under my name without my authorization to purchase this house entirely under Apex Living's corporate title. Gasps erupted from my family members. My Aunt Sarah stood up from the sofa, staring at Mark in absolute disbelief. Mark, is this true? Did you buy this house using Clara's money without putting her name on the deed? No, it's a misunderstanding. It's a tax strategy. Mark stammered, his face red and sweating profusely under the recessed ceiling lights. Clara knew about this. We discussed structuring it under an LLC to save on property taxes. If it was a tax strategy, Mark, then why is your mistress listed as the sole managing director? I asked calmly. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the second set of documents, glossy 8x10 photographic prints taken by my private investigator. I placed them directly on the marble kitchen counter next to the catering platters. The top photograph showed Mark and Chloe kissing on the beach in Florida. The second photograph showed them sitting on the very bed upstairs, sipping wine 3 days ago while discussing how to leave me with the $30,000 debt. Mark's colleagues stepped back from the kitchen island, staring at the photos in disgust. My uncle stepped forward, pointing an angry finger at Mark. You absolute coward. She worked 60 hours a week to pay for your life. Get out of my house. Eleanor suddenly shrieked, her voice turning high-pitched and hysterical as she rushed toward me. You jealous, ungrateful little clerk. You gave that money to my son's business venture. You have no legal rights to this property. Apex Living owns this deed. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing. I looked at Eleanor with a calm, pitying smile. I pulled the final document from my briefcase, the signed court order from the county judge. As of 4 p.m. today, Eleanor, the county court has issued a full asset freeze on Apex Living, I said, handing a certified copy to the lead officer. This property is officially classified as a crime scene under active investigation for grand larceny, wire fraud, and identity theft. Furthermore, a temporary restraining order has been placed on all three of you. The lead officer stepped toward Eleanor, pulling out a set of official notices. Eleanor Sterling, Mark Sterling, and Chloe Bennett. You are required to vacate these premises immediately. You have 15 minutes to gather your personal belongings under police supervision. Vacate? Chloe gasped, dropping her clipboard onto the hardwood floor. I live here. My clothes are upstairs. Your clothes were bought with stolen credit funds, Miss Bennett, the second officer stated firmly. Step away from the kitchen and keep your hands where we can see them. The room descended into absolute chaos. My relatives began walking out in disgust, shaking their heads at Mark and Eleanor as they left. Mark's colleagues hastily put on their coats and walked out the front door without saying a word to him. Mark fell to his knees in the middle of the hallway, sobbing, grabbing at my sleeve. Clara, please, don't do this to me. My mother convinced me it was the right move. She said we could start over. Please, talk to me in private. I pulled my arm away from his grip, looking down at him with utter detachment. You had 7 years to talk to me as a husband, Mark, I said softly. Now you can talk to my attorney through the county prosecutor. The legal fallout was immediate and destructive for all three of them. With the mountain of forensic evidence, bank transfer logs, forged signature scans, and private investigator photographs, the state prosecutor filed formal criminal charges. Eleanor and Chloe were indicted on counts of grand larceny, wire fraud, and conspiracy. To avoid maximum prison sentences, Eleanor accepted a plea agreement that required her to liquidate her personal retirement accounts to repay every single dollar of the $185,000, plus legal fees and damages. Chloe's fake design firm was permanently dissolved by the state, and she received 3 years of formal probation, community service, and a permanent criminal record for corporate fraud. Mark was named as an unindicted co-conspirator. His logistics firm fired him less than a week after the incident, when news of the public arrest at the housewarming party reached his corporate HR department. With no job, no savings, and a ruined reputation, he was forced to move into his mother's small apartment while they both sold off their personal assets to cover their mounting legal expenses. Our divorce was finalized 4 months later. Through the court-ordered restitution and asset liquidation, I recovered 100% of my $185,000 savings, and the $30,000 fraudulent credit line was completely wiped from my credit profile. With the funds restored, I purchased a beautiful historic townhouse in my own name, a place built on honesty, hard work, and complete independence. A week after the final divorce decree was signed, Mark sent me a long email begging for forgiveness. He wrote that his mother had controlled his entire life, that he had made the biggest mistake of his existence, and that he missed the quiet, peaceful home we used to share. I read the email, saved a copy for my legal records, and deleted it without replying. Mark, Eleanor, and Chloe believed they could use my quiet dedication as a weapon against me. They thought that because I was patient, soft-spoken, and forgiving, I would swallow humiliation to avoid making a public scene. But they failed to realize one fundamental truth. Quiet people don't lack strength. We simply wait until we have all the facts before we make our move. If this story reminded you that self-respect is worth more than keeping the peace with toxic people, leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice, resilience, and truth. Good night.